everybody. My name is Darian Wheeler, and today I'm going to be giving my movie presentation for this final project. So, the movie that I chose to do my review on and analysis of is Crazy Rich Asians. This is a movie released in 2018 by director Jon Chu, but originally this was a book released by Kevin Kwan in 2013. To give you guys a little bit of a summary of the plot so we know what's going on, this is the story of a couple. This is going to be Rachel and her boyfriend Nick. So Rachel is a Chinese American professor of economics and game theory at New York University, and her boyfriend Nick wants to take her back with him to introduce her to his family in Singapore for the first time. His best friend Colin is going to be getting married as well while they're over there, so this is kind of a big trip for him. He's really excited. She doesn't know anything about his family, really. So, as Rachel makes it over to Singapore, she learns, after running into her best friend from college, Peek Lin, that Nick's family isn't who she thought that they would be, and he's not who she thought he was. He is actually the heir to one of the biggest fortunes in Singapore, and his family is one of the most wealthy, most influential families in the entire area. Basically, they own everything. So after Nick introduces Rachel to his family and to his mother Eleanor, she does not approve because Rachel is not from Singapore. She's not from the right family. Her mom was an immigrant to America and raised Rachel on her own, so she just doesn't meet the caliber. After some convincing from her best friend, Rachel decides that she's going to earn Nick's mother's approval, and she's going to win her over, and everything is going to plan out great. Ultimately, his mother takes things too far with a private investigation into some very personal information that Rachel didn't even know about herself, and she ends up leaving in tears, basically, because Nick's mother and grandmother embarrassed her so bad. So she makes the decision to leave Nick and return home to the United States, to go back to her professor job, to go back to her mom, basically everything she knows and loves. But before she does that, she invites Nick's mother to play a game of mahjong, which is a very important game in their culture, and it's kind of a nod to her experience with being an expert on game theory and economics at New York University. Not to spoil it, but it does have a happy ending, and Nick ends up proposing to Rachel with his mother's ring as a sign of her approval that Rachel's finally done it, and she can become part of the family. So, to go over some characters for you guys so we know who everybody's talking about, this is a exceptionally beautiful cast, if I might say so. So we're going to go over the main characters first. This is going to be Rachel. This is Nick. This is going to be Astrid. This is Nick's cousin, who is also a very important fashionista. She's a very important, just kind of influencer celebrity. Everybody knows who she is. She's kind of a big deal. This is going to be Peek Lin, so this is going to be Rachel's very best friend. This down here is Colin. This is going to be Nick's best friend, and his fiancée is right over here. Her name is Araminta. Then right here beside Araminta, we do have Michael, and that's going to be Astrid's husband. And finally right here, this is Miss Eleanor herself. This is Nick's mother. So the relevance of this movie is a really big deal for a lot of people, and we're going to talk about why. Most importantly, this is the first all-Asian cast, the all-Asian film by a major Hollywood studio in over 25 years. So that was a really big deal. It was a huge box office hit, bringing in over $238 million worldwide on only a $30 million budget. So it got a lot of attention for that reason as well. It has a lot of critical acclaim and a lot of social impact. So this movie was one that got a lot of attention because for the first time people recognized themselves in the cast of this movie. It does a really good job of picking up small cultural nuance about China and about Singapore that really related to a lot of people, and it made it really special for them. This movie ended up being a Golden Globe nominee, a Critics' Choice Award nominee 4 times, and it did take home the Critics' Choice Award for Best Comedy. So in this presentation, we're going to be talking about some key things, all right? So we're going to be going over the stages of culture shock displayed in this movie, friendships, family expectations, expressing love, and finally, presentation and honor. So first, we are going to get into culture shock. So this is actually two shots of Rachel. This is the beginning where she is in her element at NYU giving a lecture on game theory, and this is that game of Mahjong that we talked about. So over the course of this movie, Rachel really has to learn to adjust to kind of two new cultures. She has to get used to being in Singapore and see how it is to be in Asia because she's never been, as well as learning she has to adjust to the super rich lifestyle that his family leads. So it's a lot for her going on at one time. So chapter 10 of our textbook outlines the process of culture shock and how you get used to it, how you get over it, and this movie does a really good job of demonstrating each of the steps. It is on an accelerated timeline. The movie doesn't say how long they're over there for, but this is a process, according to the book, that can take years. But it happens kind of quickly. So stage 1 is initial contact. This is when Rachel and Nick first make their way over to Singapore. They're greeted by Colin and his fiance. They go to a street market. They get lots of food. They explore in a Jeep with the top off. It's got this montage moment. It's really fun. It's really exciting. Everything there is beautiful for her. The next stage is disintegration, and this is when Rachel starts to experience some of the negative parts of being in that culture, like Eleanor not liking her because she's American, as well as some of Araminta, Colin's fiance's friends, on the bachelorette trip call Rachel a gold digger and say that she only wants Nick for his money. Not true, but she kind of faces the backlash of being in a new culture. Next is reintegration. So this happens for Rachel as she's invited to Nick's grandmother's house to go make dumplings, which is a big deal. She's experiencing the positives of this culture again. She's kind of getting involved and really like taking her own turn at it. But the problem is that the negatives do come back up, and that Eleanor makes Rachel feel more outcast than ever for being American and not being good enough for her son and what she thinks her son deserves. The next stage is gradual autonomy. This happens for Rachel as she decides that she is going to win Eleanor's respect, and she makes a point to go to Colin's wedding, to sit in the front. She makes friends with the right people by herself. She's not really depending on anybody else for this interaction. She's kind of taking the reins and knows how to operate. Finally, this stage is last defined as reciprocal interdependence. This is the fifth and final stage. So this is kind of where she learns to ride the line of the two cultures, which is why I bring it back to this scene. So she has her own culture of game theory in New York and her own experience, but Mahjong is a really important game in this culture, and it's something that mothers teach their daughters. And so it really means a lot when Rachel challenges Eleanor essentially to this game, and in the game, it ends with Rachel letting Eleanor win, essentially, as a nod to respect and as a nod to the bigger conversation going on that Rachel is going to leave Nick because Eleanor's just not going to approve. So next, we're going to be talking about how this movie covers American versus Asian friendships, or individual cultures versus collective culture friendships. So first, we see up here, this is going to be Rachel and Pick Lin, and one of my sources from Klein did a study that found that American friendships are defined with certain activities, and certain activities are associated with friendships. And these include shopping, acts of service, talking, and you really see this displayed in the movie as Pick Lin helps Rachel dress appropriately for these high caliber events that she had no idea she needed to be prepared for. She brought simple American clothes, but in this context, in this culture, she needed high fashion designers. She needed to look the part and play the part so they would accept her. Next, we move down to Colin and Nick, and this interaction is defined by a lot of nonverbal communication. So chapter 4 in the book talks about a peripheral gaze, and you kind of see how the chairs aren't directly facing each other. At one point, they were sitting back in the chairs looking out at the water, not necessarily looking at each other, and not doing a lot of talking. And this is important because in collective culture, silence isn't necessarily a bad thing. It represents mutual respect and interpersonal sensitivity, so it's not anything weird, but it just shows a different element of friendship. Next, we dive into familial expectations. So, down here, we talk about how Rachel's mom is really excited that she's a professor at NYU. For a lot of kids with Asian immigrant parents, Rachel makes a joke about this at the beginning. Their biggest dream is for their kid to be something big, like a doctor, a lawyer, a professor at NYU. So it was most important to Rachel's mom that Rachel did what she wanted to do and followed her own dreams and passion. This is compared to Nick, and the Roland article that I used talked about how collective cultures really emphasize a hierarchical family and community relationships. So it makes it harder for Nick to walk away from the family business. He's expected to take it over, and his mom is depending on him to do that so that she gets her husband back, essentially. He can't really walk away from what his parents expect. He can't really change it. And it's actually a scandal it took him so long to come back after undergrad. Next, we're going to talk about expressing familial love in Asian cultures. So, this movie kind of addresses a lot of dynamics of that, but the one big one that I wanted to touch on was that making food is one of the biggest ways to express love, express community in these cultures, and so inviting Rachel over to make dumplings is kind of a big deal. And you see at the table, you have older cousins, aunties, uncles, you have young, old, everybody's there making dumplings together because it's something that they're going to enjoy together, which is a big deal. Finally, we're going to talk about honor, dignity, and how that affects materialism. So this is the entrance shot featuring Astrid in the movie. This is her. She's in a jewelry store, and this is actually a pair of earrings that she's shopping for, valued at $1.2 million. Now, she is crazy rich, but when she finds out how expensive they are, you see her smile. And that's actually really important because, as chapter 3 of the book points out, it's actually a nonverbal that a lot of people in Asian cultures use to save face. If they're smiling, they're kind of de-escalating the situation. She's not showing that she's uncomfortable with the price. It's also important to point out, as according to the LaFerrell article, that in these cultures, how you present yourself represents your entire family. Because of the collective culture, they see material objects and your outward presentation as actually a representation of the entire family. So when you're looking at a country like Singapore that's exceptionally rich, you see that the standard of what is normal goes up and up and up. So for her, high fashion designers are something that she wears every day because she's part of the young family and she's expected to look it. In conclusion, you can see that this movie is absolutely filled to the brim with intercultural experiences and learning opportunities. There is absolutely more in this movie than I could cover in this video. We talked about the stages of culture shock, friendships, family and cultural expectations. We talked about expressing love, honor, materialism, saving face. This movie really does have it all. It's a beautiful, engaging story that everybody can enjoy and truly take something away from. Thanks for paying attention and listening.